Today I'm going to tell you a story from the Wild West that once made a whole town laugh. They said a cowboy had ruined his life when he married a woman who never stopped talking. They even placed bets he'd run away before winter came. But no one expected that very voice, the one they mocked as a curse, would become the rope that pulled him through fire, through fever, and turned a lonely house into a home with a heartbeat. This isn't just a love story. It's a secret that left an entire town speechless. If you love stories like this from the Wild West, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next tale. The bell above Dustrock's clapboard church had never tolled for anything as strange or as funny to some as it did that blazing afternoon in late July of 1882. Folks came out not in their Sunday best, but in whatever they had on, as though summoned not to a sacred union, but to a circus. On the wooden steps of the church, Buck Avery, owner of the Copper Mare Saloon, stood like a ringmaster. A bulging leather pouch hung from his belt. He snapped it open, fanned slips of paper in the hot breeze, and called out in a voice thick with whiskey and humor, "Step right up, ladies and gents. Place your bets. How long'll it take before Wes Calder runs screaming from his brand new bride? A month, 2, I got odds on 3. Don't be shy now, every man knows there ain't a pair of ears west of the Mississippi that could survive June Hollis more than a season." Laughter rippled through the gathering crowd. Even the horses hitched along Main Street seemed to shift and snort as if in on the joke. Inside the church vestibule, Wes Calder tugged at the collar of his cleanest shirt. The starched fabric felt like rope around his throat. At 37, he'd weathered Stampede's broken bones and the influenza that had taken his sister and her children. Yet nothing rattled him, quite like standing in a room buzzing with anticipation of his humiliation. He wasn't marrying for the town's amusement. He wasn't marrying because he'd lost a bet, though Buck would gladly tell it that way. He was marrying because the nights had grown too long, too quiet, and too full of ghosts. Beside him, June Hollis hummed as though she'd been waiting all her life for this moment. She was 34, a widow of 2 years, and her reputation preceded her like a trumpet blast. Some said she'd once talked a runaway stagecoach team to a standstill. Others swore she'd chattered a peddler out of his entire stock just by asking questions until he gave up. June never denied any of it. Her bonnet sat askew because she'd adjusted it 3 times in the last 10 minutes. Her hands fluttered, patting her skirts, smoothing her hair, straightening Wes's tie, without asking permission. And her mouth, Lord help them, never stopped. I told Maisie Clark she'd best send her youngest to fetch more ice for the reception. This heat will melt a man's patience quicker than butter in a skillet. Wes, do stop pulling at your collar. You look like a schoolboy dragged to lessons. And don't scowl so much, you'll frighten the photographer. Did you know Reverend's wife made a lemon cake just for us? Oh, I simply must tell you, June. Wes's voice was low, rough as wagon wheels on gravel. She grinned, eyes stealing. Yes, dear husband-to-be. Just breathe. Outside, Buck roared again. Place your wedge ears. Who says Wes makes it to Christmas? Who says he bolts before the leaves fall? Coins clinked into his pouch, and the townsfolk laughed until their sides hurt. The heavy door swung open, and Sheriff Ada Boone strode in. At 30, Ada carried herself like a soldier revolver, low on her hip badge gleaming. She eyed the crowd with disdain before planting herself squarely in front of Buck's table. I'll be taking those slips, Buck. Now, Sheriff. Now nothing. You're obstructing a house of worship. Hand them over. Buck chuckled, trying charm. Ada, darling, it's just harmless fun. Harmless ends when it undermines a marriage before it's even begun. She snatched the pouch from his belt. Papers fluttered across the churchyard like startled doves. The crowd groaned and booed good-naturedly, but Ada's glare silenced them quick enough. From the vestibule, June craned her neck to see. Well, would you look at that, our first miracle. The sheriff herself has come to bless us with a little discipline. Isn't that fine, Wes? Oh, Ada, you've saved us from a lifetime of wagers, at least until tomorrow. Ada raised a brow. You sure you're ready for this? Junetown's been sharpening its tongue. June winked. Let them sharpen. I'll give 'em plenty to chew on. Wes's lips twitched despite himself. It wasn't quite a smile, but it wasn't the frown he'd worn all morning either. The ceremony began with Reverend Whitlow speaking words half the crowd ignored. Children tugged at skirts, dogs barked outside, and heat shimmered in the rafters. But June answered to each vow, with gusto, her voice carrying to the back pew. I do, she said loud and clear, when asked if she would take Wes Calder. When Reverend turned to Wes, silence fell like a blanket. The town leaned in, half expecting him to choke. Wes looked at Jean. She was gibrant alive, unstoppable. Her chatter might drive a man to distraction, but in her eyes there was something steady, something he hadn't seen in years. He thought of the ranch 5 miles out, the empty cabin, the ticking clock on the mantel, the wind whining through the chinks at night. He thought of silence as a living thing, suffocating and cruel. I do, he said, voice firm. The crowd exhaled. Some clapped, others snickered. Buck muttered to his neighbor that I do sounded more like, Lord help me. Reverend declared them man and wife. June seized Wes's face and kissed him soundly before anyone could object. Applause and hoots filled the churchyard. When they stepped outside, Buck was waiting with a sly grin, though his betting slips had been confiscated. Congratulations, Calder. May your ears find peace in the hereafter, since they won't in this life. June clapped her hands together. Oh, Buck, you're too kind. If you need lessons in listening, I'll be happy to provide them free of charge. I've got plenty of words to spare. The crowd erupted again. Some laughed at her, some with her, but no one could deny she had command of the moment. Wes guided her toward the wagon, face expressionless. Yet when a paper slip caught on his boot, he stooped and picked it up. Scribbled across it in Buck's handwriting were the words 2 months tops. He folded the slip, tucked it into his vest pocket. He didn't know if it was proof of the town's cruelty or a challenge he meant to beat. Either way, it burned like a coal against his chest. The ride out of town was slow. Folks lined the street, waving, jeering, whispering. Poor Wes, someone called. Couldn't wrangle a cow, so he wrangled a chatterbox. Give it time, another added. He'll beg for silence before the harvest. June sat tall on the wagon seat, waving as though she were queen of Dustrock. Thank you all for your good wishes. I'll be sure to send you news every week, detailed letters. Mind you, with every little happening on the ranch. The mockers fell strangely quiet. Some chuckled nervously. Wes shook his head, reins steady in his hands. When they cleared the last cluster of buildings, silence finally fell. Fields stretched out, golden and white, cicadas buzzing. Wes exhaled long and low. June tilted her head. Too quiet, isn't it? He glanced at her. Don't start. But she only smiled, pulling a small glass jar from her carpet bag. A label scrawled in looping script read, Shish jar. Every time you tell me to hush, she said sweetly, you'll owe me a penny. By Christmas, I expect to be rich. Wes stared at the jar, then at her. For the first time all day, a true smile cracked across his face. The wagon rumbled on toward the ranch, toward a house that had been too quiet for too long. Behind them, Dustrock buzzed with laughter, wagers, and doubt. Ahead, only the horizon waited, wide, endless, and for the first time in years alive, with the sound of another human voice. And whether it drove him mad or saved his soul, Wes Calder knew one thing for certain. He'd chosen it. The Calder Ranch sat 5 miles from Dustrock, tucked against a ridge of wind-bent cottonwoods. The 2-room cabin had stood for nearly a decade, though weather and loneliness had gnawed at it. Wes had built it board by board, each plank carrying the weight of solitude. Now, as the wagon rolled into the yard with June at his side, the place felt different. She hopped down before he could offer a hand, skirts swishing. "Oh, it's sturdy. I see what you've done. Added that lean-to, patch the roof yourself. And look at that barn, Wes Calder, you undersell yourself. Why, this isn't a bachelor's shack at all. It's a home." Wes unhitched the team in silence. He wasn't used to praise, not for the house, not for anything. The barn door creaked. Chickens clucked, the wind sighed. But over it all was June's voice, rising, falling, never resting. She marched inside, carrying her jar like a prize. On the kitchen table she set it down with a flourish. The glass caught the afternoon light. There she announced, the jar's first official placement. "You'll see, it's more than a joke. It's a promise." Wes raised an eyebrow. "A promise? Every time you try to silence me, you'll pay a toll. That way I'll know my voice is valued even when it annoys you. And maybe," she added, eyes twinkling, "you'll think twice before trying." He snorted softly. "Sounds like robbery." She pushed the jar toward him. "Robbery or investment? Your choice." He dug into his vest pocket, pulled a penny, and dropped it in with a clink. June clapped. "Marvelous. A man who pays his debts promptly. You'll make a fine husband after all." He shook his head, fighting a smile. That sound, the clink of copper in glass, echoed against the cabin walls louder than he expected. For years, the only noises at night had been the lonely tick of a clock and the whisper of wind. Now there was laughter. Now there was her. Days passed. June threw herself into ranch life with gusto. She talked to the chickens as if they were old friends, scolded the milk cow for stinginess, and recited shopping lists aloud until Wes could repeat them by heart. At first he bristled. Then he noticed something. Her words filled spaces where his grief used to echo. One evening after supper, he leaned back and let her chatter wash over him. She was describing the color of sunsets she'd seen in Missouri, her hands waving like paintbrushes. He caught himself nodding, caught the warmth curling in his chest. When she noticed him watching, she winked. "Careful, cowboy. You look like a man enjoying himself." He grunted, tossed another penny in the jar. She laughed so hard she nearly tipped her chair. But Dustrock wasn't ready to forgive or forget. Every time Wes rode into town for supplies, he heard the whispers. "Poor Calder. The Chatterbox'll drive him to the asylum." Buck Avery's saloon rang with jokes at Wes's expense. June heard too. Instead of shrinking, she straightened. One Saturday, as Wes loaded sacks of flour into the wagon, Buck swaggered out of the copper mare. His grin spread wide as the prairie. "Well, Calder, rumor has it you can't hear yourself think no more. Does she ever stop?" A chorus of chuckles rose. June stepped from the wagon, bonnet tilted just so. "She stops," she said sweetly, "when a man finally says something worth listening to. Which in your case, Buck Avery, could take another life deal." The crowd gasped, then roared. Wes blinked, startled. Buck's grin faltered for just a heartbeat before he rallied. "Sharp tongue, Mrs. Calder. Careful, it might cut your husband to ribbons." June folded her arms. If words cut, then laughter heals. "Tell you what, Buck, let's make a wager." Wes stiffened. "June," but she pressed on. "You're so fond of bets. How about this next Saturday? I'll host a storytelling night right here in your saloon. If the crowd laughs with me, not at me, you'll end your little betting pool and tear down every scrap of mockery you've plastered on these walls." "Deal." Buck barked a laugh. "Lady, you'd walk into the copper mare and take the stage. You'd set yourself up like a target in a shooting gallery." June's eyes glowed. Not a target, a headliner. The sheriff, Ada Boone, had been leaning against a post nearby listening. She pushed off, adjusting her hat. "I'll be there. If Buck cheats, I'll haul him in." "Sounds fair to me." Buck hesitated. He never turned down a bet. Fine, 1 week. Hope Calder's ears hold out that long. As Wes guided June back into the wagon, he muttered, "You'll get yourself torn apart." She patted his arm. "Nonsense. Words are my trade. Let me use them." The shijar clinked that night, another penny inside. But Wes lay awake long after, wondering if June's words could truly shield her, or if they'd only give the town more ammunition. The copper mare had seen many spectacles, fistfights, poker showdowns, even a runaway mule once, but never a crowd so thick it pressed against the walls. Every chair, every barrel, every patch of floor was claimed. Smoke hung heavy, mingling with the tang of spilled whiskey. Buck Avery presided from behind the bar, smug as a king. Step up, step up. Drinks on the house till the lady speaks. After that, well, we'll see who's still laughing. June arrived on Wes's arm, wearing her best calico dress and that impossible bonnet. The shijar she carried like a lantern, holding it high so the crowd could see the coins rattling inside. "This," she announced, "is proof my husband values my voice more than some folks value their honor." She set it on the bar with a decisive clink. The crowd whooped. Buck sneered. "Get on with it, Chatterbox. Show us what you've got." June mounted the small stage, a rickety platform, usually reserved for fee fiddlers. She looked out at the faces, mocking, curious, expectant. Then she smiled wide and fearless. "Good evening, Dustrock. I'm June Calder, though most of you call me other names. Chatterbox, Parrot, Echo. I've heard them all. But tonight you get to decide, am I a nuisance, or am I entertainment?" A murmur swept the room. She began with a story about her late husband's mule, the dumbest animal in Missouri, she claimed, who once tried to drink kerosene. Her pacing was quick, her gestures theatrical, her voice lilting. Laughter bubbled up. Even skeptical men slapped their knees. She moved on, weaving tales of Dustrock itself, the time Sheriff Ada fell asleep during Sunday sermon and denied it. The time Buck Avery's wig nearly blew off in a dust storm, though he'd sworn for years his hair was real. Ada chuckled openly. Buck turned red. Wes stood at the back, arms crossed, watching. At first his stomach had been tight, waiting for ridicule. But as the minutes passed, he saw something shift. The crowd leaned forward, not to sneer, but to savor. June's words weren't weapons, they were spells. Half an hour later, the saloon rang with laughter. June wrapped her final story with a flourish, bowing low. "Thank you, Dustrock. Remember, a town that laughs together lives longer together." The applause was thunderous. Some stood. Ada tapped her badge against her palm like a gavel. "All right, Avery," she said over the din. "A bet's a bet." Grumbling Buck pulled down the crude signs and scraps of paper that had mocked the Calders for weeks. One by one, he tossed them into the potbelly stove. The crowd cheered louder as flames licked the edges. June lifted the shijar coins, glimmering in firelight. "See, words can build, words can bind, and words, my friends, can pay." Wes felt something uncoil inside him, something he hadn't known was wound so tight. Pride, sharp and unexpected, swelled in his chest. As they left the saloon, he touched her elbow. "You did it." She looked up, eyes bright. "Did you doubt me, husband?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out another penny, and dropped it into the jar. The clink rang clear in the night, echoing down Dustrock's main street like a bell of defiance. Behind them, the saloon door swung shut, muffling the lingering laughter. But inside Wes's chest, something new had started. A rhythm, a warmth. The sound of a voice he would not trade for silence, not ever again. By late August, Dustrock's skies turned restless. The prairie heat, thickened clouds piling high like dark mountains. Wes knew the signs. He'd spent years watching weather roll in, learning the language of thunder and wind. That evening, he stepped onto the porch, hand shading his eyes. The horizon boiled with purple and black. A dry gust rattled the cottonwoods. "Storm's coming fast," he muttered. June leaned out the doorway, apron tied crooked from her haste. "How bad?" "Bad enough I need to check the barn. Roof ain't as steady as it should be." She grabbed a lantern before he could stop her. "Then I'm coming too. June. Don't June me, husband. If those horses panic, you'll need 2 sets of hands." He wanted to argue, but the sky cracked open with a jagged bolt, and the first fat raindrops slapped the dust. Wes clamped his hat down, and they ran. The barn shook with the storm's first roar. Inside, the horses stamped and blue eyes rolling white. The wind hammered the roof, rattling loose boards. "Easy, easy now," Wes called, grabbing the halter of his lead mare. But the din was deafening. The animals heard nothing but their own fear. The lantern swung wild in June's hand, throwing shadows like demons against the rafters. She didn't hesitate. Setting the lantern on a crate, she planted herself in the center of the barn and raised her voice, rapid and bright words tumbling like a stream over rocks. Once there was a boy named Henry who thought he could outrun the wind itself, only to trip over his own boots and land face first in a cow pie. Oh, the stink of him! And do you know what the cow said? "Moo. Henry, moo." Her tone rose and fell quick and sure, spinning nonsense tales faster than thunder. To Wes's astonishment, the horses stilled, ears flicking toward her chatter. The cadence gave them something to follow, a rope through the storm. Wes wrestled the last gate closed, heart pounding. When he finally turned, June was laughing breathlessly, rain dripping from her bonnet. "See? Told you a voice can be louder than fear." He stared at her, drenched and glowing in lantern light. "You're mad," she grinned. "And you're welcome." A loose shingle smacked the ground outside. The storm would rage half the night, but the herd was safe. And as June's words filled the barn, Wes realized something. Her voice had become his compass. In chaos, he followed it without thinking. The storm passed, leaving the prairie drenched and steaming. Wes spent the next day repairing damaged shoulders aching. By nightfall, he felt a chill that no blanket could warm. June fussed, pressing a hand to his forehead. "You're burning up. Just tired." He tried to brush her off, but his cough betrayed him, sharp and deep. By morning, the fever had him. He lay on the bed, sweat soaking the sheets, breath ragged. The world blurred in and out. June hovered, her voice relentless. "You listen here, Wes Calder. You're not allowed to die. Not after I finally found a man stubborn enough to keep up with me. I'll tell you stories till the cows come home, but you'd better stay awake to hear them." Doc Whitaker arrived by noon, his bag clanking with bottles. He peered at Wes, frowned, and drew June aside. "Storm sickness," he murmured. "Lungs caught the damp. Could turn bad quick. Don't let him sink too deep into sleep. Keep him engaged. Talk to him." June's heart pounded. "Talk. That's all talk. Sing. Recite the Declaration of Independence if you must. Just don't let the silence swallow him." So she did. Through the long night, June sat at Wes's side, slate eyes rimmed red with exhaustion. She talked of everything: her childhood in Missouri, the ridiculous mule stories, the way she once burned a pie so black it looked like coal. She counted the freckles on her arms, recited recipes, even described every curtain pattern she'd ever sewn. Whenever his eyes fluttered closed too long, she leaned close and kept the rhythm steady. "One day we'll paint this house blue. Did you hear me? West blue with white trim and a porch swing, where I'll chatter till your ears fall clean off. Stay with me, cowboy. Don't you dare leave me to the silence." Sometimes he groaned. Sometimes his lips moved. Once in the dead of night, he whispered so faintly she almost missed it. "Don't. Let it be quiet. I can't stand quiet." Her throat tightened. She reached for his hand, squeezed hard. "Then it won't be. Not as long as I've got breath." By dawn, her voice cracked from overuse, but his fever had eased. Doc returned, checked him, and gave a gruff nod. He'll live, thanks to that mouth of yours. When the doctor left, June slumped against the bed frame, tears sliding down her cheeks. Wes stirred, eyes half open. You never stopped, he rasped. She laughed shakily. Of course not. Somebody's got to keep this house alive. His hand fumbled toward hers. Then don't stop, ever. The shijar gleamed on the shelf across the room, coins winking in the weak morning light. June looked at it and whispered, No husband. I won't. Wes was still pale when September's sun burned over Dustrock. His fever had broken, but strength returned slow, leaving him thinner, slower, and restless. June fussed but never mocked, guiding him with chatter and laughter, as if words themselves were medicine. They thought the worst had passed until the rattle of wagon wheels announced trouble. 2 black-coated men climbed down in the yard, their boots polished, their expressions sour. A third, puffed up like a rooster, bore the seal of the county commission. Behind them rode Buck Avery, grinning like a man already paid. Morning, the official barked. This property is under quarantine review. Possible infection. June stiffened. My husband is recovering. He's no danger to anyone. The man unrolled a paper thick with ink and stamps. By order of the county, the ranch is to be sealed until inspection clears it. No visitors, no commerce, no apprentices. His eyes flicked to young Noah Pike, who stood frozen near the barn. That boy is to be removed. Noah's face drained. Removed? But I work here. Buck stepped forward, feigning sympathy. Now, boy, don't fret. I can find you work at the Copper Mare. Safer there than in a sick house. June's jaw clenched. She stepped onto the porch, skirts brushing the planks. And what gives you the right, Buck Avery, to escort county men? You a deputy now, or just sniffing opportunity? Buck smirked. Just looking out for the town's welfare. The inspector dipped his pen in ink. Madam, step aside. We'll be marking this property. June's hands shook, but not from fear. She marched back inside and returned with a stack of papers, handwritten petitions, each bearing a signature. She thrust them toward the inspector. These are from Dustrock's women, Maisie Clark, Martha Dunlop, every member of the ladies' circle. They vouch for us. We are healthy. We are contributing. This is harassment, not law. The official hesitated, riffling through the names. He frowned. Proper channels weren't followed. June's voice sharpened. Proper channels are clogged with men too busy taking bribes from saloon keepers. You think we don't know Sheriff Ada Boone does? She'll want to see that order before a seal touches this door. The crowd had grown, neighbors drawn by rumor, gathering at the fence. Whispers rose sharp with judgment. Maybe it's true. She talks a man sick. Maybe that's what happened. Poor Wes. Wes, leaning against the doorframe for support, felt shame creep hot across his skin. The very silence he feared pressed in from every side. The inspector, uncomfortable, lowered his pen. We'll return when the sheriff is present. Till then, no action. Buck bristled, but June smiled, sweet as honey. That'll be just fine, gentlemen. I'll bake biscuits for your next visit, unless you'd rather chew on paper stamps again. Laughter flickered through the neighbors. The inspectors withdrew, Buck trailing behind with a face like thunder. For the moment, the ranch was safe. But Wes knew the battle wasn't over. And when June turned, pride shining in her eyes, he could only think, what if her voice wasn't enough next time? The rumors spread faster than prairie fire. Within days, whispers twisted into lies. June Hollis had poisoned her husband with constant nagging. Her ceaseless voice had weakened him. The Calder Ranch was a house of contagious agent. At the Copper Mare, Buck poured drinks over every ugly story. The Chatterbox will kill him yet, he crowed, and coins clinked across the bar. Men laughed. Women shook their heads, and the poison stuck. One morning, Noah Pike returned from town with his shoulders slumped. They're saying the county means to place me with another family, that I can't stay here because Mrs. Calder's cursed. June froze flour dusting her hands. Cursed? He nodded miserably. They say your words rot men's bones. For the first time since Wes had known her, June was silent. Not playful, not pausing for effect, truly struck dumb. She turned away, shoulders stiff, and walked to the bedroom. The door shut behind her. Wes sat at the table staring at the shijar. Its glass belly caught the morning light, filled nearly to the brim with pennies. But there was no sound, no clink, no voice filling the air. That night, the house was still as a tomb. Wes lay awake listening to nothing. The clock ticked each second, scraping across his nerves. He wanted to call out to her, to ask her to speak anything, but his pride chained him. In the dark he heard her muffled sob. It cut deeper than silence ever had. The next evening, June did something reckless. She put on her bonnet and walked alone into Dustrock. Wes, too weak to follow, watched from the porch as she vanished down the road. At the Copper Mare, the saloon was full, Buck laughing louder than anyway. June pushed through the swinging doors, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. On the bar, she dropped a faded pouch, the very one Buck had used months ago, for his betting slips. With a swift motion, she spilled its contents. Dozens of crumpled wagers scattered across the floor. "Here's your fun," she said, voice steady, though her hands trembled. "You bet against my marriage, against my husband's health, against my worth. Every name's written here, neighbors, friends, so-called gentlemen. Look at them." The room hushed. The slips fluttered like dead leaves. June drew a breath. "You say my words sicken. Then tell me why my words kept Wes alive through fever. Tell me why he begged me not to stop speaking. Tell me why silence nearly killed him, and laughter, my laughter, brought him back." She bent, gathered the slips one by one, holding them high for all to see. If words can kill, they can save. Which truth do you want remembered when your children ask what kind of town Dustrock was? A murmur rippled, uncertain, ashamed. Even Maisie Clark, once sharpest critic, lowered her eyes. Buck tried to sneer. "You think talk changes fact." June met his gaze, steady as iron. "I think truth outlives rumor, and my truth is stronger than your lies." With that, she walked out, leaving the saloon stunned. Back at the ranch, she collapsed into Wes's arms. Her face was streaked with tears, but her jaw was set. "I can't fight them forever," she whispered. "If they take Noah, if they take our ranch, what good are my words then?" Wes held her weak, but resolute. "June, listen to me. Words aren't just sound. They are breath. They are life. And yours are all that keep this house alive. Don't you dare believe them." But as he said it, thunder rumbled on the horizon again, and he feared the storm ahead would demand more from her voice than she could ever give. For the first time since she'd carried that jar into his kitchen, June didn't drop a penny inside. The shijar sat silent on the shelf, heavy with copper, but the house felt poorer than ever. All was lost. Autumn settled over Dustrock with brittle air and long shadows. The whispers had quieted, but mistrust still coiled like a snake in the grass. Wes was regaining his strength, though every cough reminded him how close he had come to leaving June alone. One cold evening, as lanterns flickered in the windows, Noah Pike burst through the door, face pale as ash. Smokey panted. "The barn's on fire." Wes staggered to his feet, heart slamming. June grabbed the shijar without thinking, her hands shaking as if the jar itself were armor. They raced outside. Flames clawed up the barn wall, sparks leaping like mad fireflies. The terrified bawl of a calf cut through the night. Noah shouted, the stalls blocked, the calves trapped. Wes plunged into the blaze without hesitation. June screamed his name, but the storm of fire swallowed her words. Smoke billowed, choking, blinding. The crowd from town, drawn by the glow, gathered at the fence. Among them, Buck Avery smirked, his face lit hellish red. Inside, Wes groped through the smoke, his lungs burned, ears ringing. Somewhere ahead, the calf bawled again. He stumbled, half falling, clawing at a jammed door. The heat pressed him down, whispering, "It's too late. Too quiet. Give up." And then he heard it, faint at first, then steady. June's voice. Not screaming nonsense, not chatter, but calling loud and sure, shaping the darkness into a map. 2 steps left, Wes, past the feed barrel. There's a broken beam ahead. Duck. He blinked through smoke, stunned. She was naming things she couldn't see, describing them, as though her eyes were in his skull. Keep moving. I'm right here. 1 breath. 1 step, 1 heartbeat. Follow my words. Each syllable was a lifeline guiding him through the inferno. He pushed the calf free, dragging it toward the sound of her voice. A beam crashed, sparks showering down, but her words wove a path, pulling him through. And then he burst into the night, calf bawling against his chest, collapsing at June's feet. The crowd roared, some in awe, some in shame. Sheriff Ada pushed forward, eyes hard. She bent near the smoldering doorway, sniffed, then lifted a scorched canister. "Kerosene," she growled. This wasn't lightning or chance. All eyes swung to Buck Avery. His smirk faltered. "You can't prove," he began, but Ada cut him off. "This brand sells only at your saloon. And I've got witnesses who saw you carting a crate this afternoon." The crowd erupted. Buck backed away, hands raised, but Ada was faster. She snapped cuffs on his wrists. "Buck Avery," she declared, "you're under arrest for arson and attempted murder." The saloon keeper sputtered, curses dragged away, under the weight of angry neighbors. June knelt beside Wes, her hands trembling on his soot-streaked face. Tears cut clean lines down her cheeks. "I told you my voice would keep you alive." He coughed, weak, but solemn. "Never doubted it. Not anymore." Behind them, the jar slipped from her apron pocket, shattered on the ground. Pennies spilled, scattering across the dirt, like fallen stars. The crowd stared, hushed. June let out a laugh, half sob, half joy. "Well, husband, I suppose we're out of shushing." And for once, Wes laughed with her. Morning came slow, the sky bruised with smoke. The barn was half gone, but the herd lived. Neighbors lingered, their faces heavy with guilt. On the porch, Wes stood straighter than he had in weeks. June beside him, soot still streaking her dress, hair tumbled. He raised his voice, not loud, but clear enough for all to hear. "You all spent months betting against us. Said her voice would ruin me, drive me mad. You called her names, laughed behind your hands. But last night, when the fire came, her words saved me. Not just me, the stock, the boy, the ranch. Every word was a rope pulling me back from the dark." He reached down, scooped a handful of the spilled pennies. The copper glinted in the morning light. "This was a joke," he said, holding them up. "A jar to measure my patience. But patience wasn't what saved me. Her voice did. Every penny in here is proof that she gave me more life than silence ever did." Slowly, he let the coins fall. They rained onto the porch boards with a ringing, defiant music. "No more shushing," Wes declared. "This house will never be quiet again, not while we're in it." June's eyes shone, tears trembling, but unfallen. She slipped her hand into his, squeezing tight. Maisie Clark, once the harshest critic, stepped forward from the crowd. Her chin trembled. "Mrs. Calder," she said softly, "if you'll allow me, I'd be honored to learn your stories." June smiled through her tears. "I'll talk your ears off, Maisie, and you'll be better for it." A ripple of laughter, warm this time, rolled through the crowd. The wall of scorn began to crumble. Spring returned to Dustrock, painting the plains green. The Calder ranch stood sturdy, despite scars of fire. Wes's health was steady now, his frame filling out with work. In the yard near the porch, a small bed of wildflowers grew bluebonnets, daisies, prairie roses. They sprouted from the broken glass of the shijar shards, half buried in soil copper pennies, glinting among petals. Children from town came to see, whispering that the flowers grew louder than others, bending in the wind like they wanted to speak. June laughed at the notion. Not louder, darlings, just freer. She sat on the porch swing Wes had built, telling stories to anyone who'd listen, neighbors, travelers, even the cows in the pasture. Her voice carried across the yard, bright and unashamed. Wes worked the fence line, pausing now and then to listen. Every word was a drumbeat in his chest. Every laugh was proof he'd never again face the silence alone. When June caught him watching, she called out, "Careful, husband, smile too much, and folks'll think I tamed you." He only tipped his hat, eyes soft. "Maybe you did. Or maybe you gave me back what I lost." And as dusk settled over Dustrock, the ranch glowed with lamplight and laughter. The town that once mocked now listened, and the cowboy who once feared silence held tight to the woman whose voice had saved his life again and again. For in the end, Dustrock remembered not the wagers, nor the laughter at their expense, but the night a voice guided a man through fire. And somewhere among the bluebonnets, the shattered glass and the pennies turned to rust. A truth lingered like a hymn. A house with words is a house with a heartbeat. In the end, Dustrock learned that words can wound, but they can also heal. Wes Calder survived not because his wife was quiet, but because she refused to be. June's voice, mocked by a whole town, became the music that carried him through fire and fever. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. What others see as weakness can be the very strength that saves a life. I believe every home has its own heartbeat, and more often than not, it beats in the sound of someone we love. That's what Wes found in June, and it's what makes their story unforgettable.